The new era of Thursday Night Football is only on Prime Video. This Thursday, the TNF season wraps up in Music City when the Dallas Cowboys come into town to tussle with the Tennessee Titans. Pre-game coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern, with TNF Tonight delivered by Little Caesars live from Tennessee. Not an Amazon Prime member? Sign up for a 30-day free trial to stream the game. It's the Cowboys and the Titans, only on Prime Video. See Amazon.com/watchtnf for details.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis podcast with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got George Bellshaw, I've got Calvin Betton, and I've got about 4 hours of content that we're going to try and squeeze into goodness knows how long it'll take us. We, of course, have been away for our Christmas break. I hope if you celebrate Christmas, you enjoyed it. If you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope you enjoyed what you did instead. We're recording this on a Thursday night, which is possibly a first for us because it's Christmas, or it's Betwixtmas technically here in the UK, and it's basically a nightmare trying to coordinate schedules, but I hope that you feel that the podcast is worth the wait. We've got loads to talk about today, but most importantly, we need to hear how your Christmas has been, George Bellshaw.
It's been very good, very pleasant. I've actually been working in Betwixtmas, so that's not helped our kind of scheduling of organising stuff. But yeah, no, it's been nice. I'm back in Birmingham. I've forgotten my microphone, so apologies if anyone can notice the sound quality difference, but he'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Great, by which point I will be on a different time zone. But anyway, Calvin, tell me about Christmas. I assume you hate Christmas.
No, I think that's probably unfair. As a tennis coach, I tend not to see much of it because we tend to work until Christmas Eve, although I've finished the day before Christmas Eve this year.
Ooh, generous.
And then, there's stuff always going on. Tournament entries, who's travelling where, who's going where am I going? So, I had a pretty quiet one, but and then a not so quiet one on Boxing Day. So,
were you at the football on Boxing Day, or were you just on the lash?
No, United didn't play on Boxing Day.
I know, so they didn't. Yeah.
I was just on the lash, as they say, in Barnsley. Yeah.
Legend.
Oh.
I spent Boxing Day on the lash in Rotherham, which is
wow.
Yeah. I'm not going to say too much more because I might get excommunicated from my partner's family. Let's move on and talk about some tennis, shall we? There's loads of different talking points, mostly things I've been arguing with people about on Twitter. We'll talk about Nick Kyrgios and Noah Rubin, believe it or not. We'll talk about Novak Djokovic, the United Cup, the Forbes list of highest paid female athletes, and number 4 will surprise you. We've got your questions from Twitter. Thank you, Eleanor, for sending us 6. I don't think we'll get to them all, but we will try. Camilla Georgie is under investigation by the police, and we'll also look at the coaching roundabout. It is that time of year when there are lots of different coaches going to lots of different players, and almost all the big players have made some changes to their team, so we'll have a look at those. But I wanted to start with, we've just finished what I call the Petro Swing, which is that we've had all the great exhibitions in the Middle East, the World Tennis League in Dubai, the Diriyah Cup in Saudi Arabia. There's been a few others as well. Prestigious, I think you'll agree, George, but basically pointless. I mean, is there not something better we can be doing with our time in December as a tennis community?
I personally just treat this as I ignore it, to be honest. And you'll get people who are interested in these exhibition events, but I am firmly not one of them. There's far too much tennis in the year already. I cannot believe the 2023 season has started and we've still got 3 or 4 days left of 2022.
Yeah.
So I just ignore it. It happens. You'll get people like Kyrgios arguing they don't get paid enough and they deserve these nice exhibition bonuses for doing very little work as an extra bonus, which I have no problem with. I'm sure we'd all pick up some extra work on the side if it was well paid and required zero effort. But I can't believe anyone's watching it. Like, to be honest, I just can't believe it's a worthwhile investment. Like paying all these players ludicrous sums of money. It just strikes me as a more money than sense sort of time of year for most people.
Yeah, you're right, and you mentioned what Nick Kyrgios will say about it, and in a rare moment of clarity on Twitter, it was quite an interesting conversation between two players. Noah Rubin, some people may remember, I think technically is a former tennis player now, and he actually plays pro pickleball, but he played a lot on the Challenger Tour. He has a podcast of his own, it's very worth listening to. And he tweeted, "How are their tennis matches being played right now on Christmas Eve? Very few care and takes the build-up out of the Aussie gets worse every year." Nick Kyrgios replied with, "I'm sure if you got offered six figures to play the game you love week in, week out, you would." Intellectual debate ensued, as you can imagine. But the overwhelming or overriding or most important point, I thought, was that Kyrgios said, "I would have to suggest that these 250s week in, week out dilute the game," to use Noah Rubin's word. "I would say an event around the world with players like Novak and I aren't killing the game." Calvin, there were a lot of empty seats. There were probably about 30 people watching some of these matches involving global superstars. I can't imagine many more around the world were watching them. I mean, I take the point that there is a time and a place for exhibitions and that sometimes lots of people will be there, but there weren't lots of people there, were there?
No, it's another case that Nick Kyrgios is right all the time, and whatever he's doing is definitely best for the game of tennis. And I don't know what his obsession is with 250s. Like, what is his plan on this? That we just won't have them? We'll have tournaments like once every 4 weeks or something? Because he hates 250s but loves pointless tournaments in demonic, despot-led, corrupt states.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one I might put to him at some point. To be like, well, if you don't want these 250s to happen, what do you think he would say, George? You're often in the mind of Nick Kyrgios.
I actually don't have an answer for that, but I actually just want to kind of spin this into a slightly different conversation around this. So I was talking to someone the other week, and they posited to me that there are actually too many professional tennis players, full stop, and that tennis should adopt a bit more of a kind of card system like golf, and have kind of a top tier where you have your cards that you can go and play on, and then kind of reduce the number of events within their card, increase the prize money, and have this kind of flat salary. What do you think the barriers are to that, and why do you think that wouldn't work, Calvin?
What I don't get this. Like, there's too many tennis players, too many professional tennis players. Like, for who? Like, and what, who's this affecting?
So this is actually a really good point, and I was just thinking about it, and would it be better if there are a few? If you take away, so how many professional tennis players are there? How many players with rankings?
There's about world ranked. There's about 1,200? World ranked. There's about 2,000, but they're not all professional tennis players. So, in terms of people who are just playing tennis worldwide, there are probably about 1,400. And in terms of people who are making money from the game, probably only about at max 200. So
is that men only or both?
Men only. So maybe a little bit less in the women's game, but that's not a huge amount compared to other sports. That's not a huge amount of people.
In fairness, I think the conversation was more aiming at the exclusivity of the top end of the tour, creating a bigger pool of players who earn, say, not just like scraping, getting by. So I think the comparison that's often used is like, I think I was reading 150 in golf is guaranteed 150. It's $500,000 a year minimum is what. Well,
there's nowhere near that in tennis.
Yeah. I know there's nowhere near that in tennis. But I'm saying 150 in the tennis game. I tracked this year, or it was 149. I can't remember who it was, but his prize money this year was a total of about 150,000.
Yeah,
and obviously considering travel on top of that, that's not breaking even, probably realistically. No, so I guess the conversation was more about: is there a way of diluting a flatter, higher line for the top players so that you have more making good money, and then the argument would go, and I'm very skeptical this could be achieved, that you have spin-off tours, like, say, European Tour or whatever, that attempts to have kind of funding and marketing for a different group of players below whoever finishes top of that can get promoted to the top tour, and you have young players who have like a wildcard tournament at the start of the year where they can earn cards onto the top tour. That's broadly my understanding of how golf works, but I'm no golf expert. But this is just someone threw it at me, and I thought it was quite an interesting discussion.
I don't have a problem. I don't have an issue with this idea about separate tours and this kind of thing and feeding in. In a way, tennis kind of has that, although it doesn't work kind of really in that way.
It's not linear, is it?
Yeah. But the problem with tennis, the problem with the distribution of money in tennis is that there's too much at the top. You don't want to be more money going in at the top. The problem is people like Novak Djokovic winning £2.5–3 million for winning a tournament. The problem is like Nick Kyrgios being able to make a fortune barely playing tennis because the tournaments that he plays, he makes a fortune in. That's where it should be cut down from the top, and the players at the top can still earn an absolute fortune, and you can put more money down the bottom. But they don't want to do that. Nick Kyrgios, all that he makes out that he's like some kind of charity, right? He doesn't care about what anyone makes below him. He always talks about how much money he wants to earn.
And he said that he had another tirade on Twitter later in the week, and he said, well, I'm bringing money into the game and I'm making money for other people in the game who don't deserve the money, which, again, I don't know if that is true, and we will talk about Netflix maybe a little bit later on in the show. I think the idea of creating a tour card system and I think is a good one. It's something that we kind of talked about a couple of weeks ago, doing with the women's tour and, creating a card set, but doing it in a much more rarefied way and just saying to 12 or 15 players, you are on the tour, the elite tour, you play every event we tell you to play, and you're guaranteed into each one, and you create a minimum salary, and you therefore create a bit of name recognition that way. This wouldn't be like that, I think. I think the idea of creating a top-level tour where you've got 100 odd players, 120 odd players, all of whom are guaranteed to turn a profit each year, would be an improvement on the current system. I also like the idea of having a feeder tour that has a bit more of a narrative. I think sometimes when you kind of talk to people about the Challenger Tour, for example, I see, so it's like the second tier, like you move from the Challenger Tour up to the ATP Tour. It's like, well, yes, but also no, because you can sort of play both. Whereas if you said, well, the Challenger Tour, you have to win this many or get this many points to get onto the main tour, then it would give it a bit more of a narrative, Calvin. I think the problem is, and I'm not strictly opposed to this idea of the tour cards and this kind of thing. The problem is with comparing tennis with golf. Golf is unique in that how it can make money in that everyone is still in the tournament, or half the people are still in the tournament. Everyone's still in for 50% of it, and I don't know, 50% of them are still in for the second 50%. So you've still got, people are still there and people are still earning money on the last 2 days. And the tournament's only gone for 4 days as well. But that's the only sport that can do that. Otherwise, every other sport, every individual sport has to have a knockout. And you can't work it like that just because of the dynamics of golf in that it's all played on a massive field. And you can have, 64 people playing at once.
Yeah, I was going to say this is tennis's other kind of key problem is facilities around the world that can house a tournament where you have 100 people they're few and far between. There's not that many tournaments, even we're talking about Monte Carlo Masters event. What's that? 64 draw, I think, or maybe 58 with 8 qualifiers, something like that.
Queens is what, 54?
Yeah, Queens is 32, I think. Queens is really small.
Oh yeah,
it's like tiny draw. So, expanding that out and kind of keeping a semblance of tennis normality is difficult. And I personally think like the best way for it to work is to have one event every week. I kind of take Kyrgios's point about the dilution in terms of 3 250 events in a week is a bit dumb, particularly when you've got 3 finals happening at the same time, which happens ludicrously often on the tennis tour, and understandably in terms of they're running as individual events who are trying to promote their own city. But for people trying to follow a sport, get this narrative. And I think, again, we've spoken about it before with like the world number one, it would be just so much easier if you had this kind of linear, here are all the events where all the top guys are playing, here's what needs to happen for this, this and this, rather than, someone's bombing off over here for 250 points, won't play for another 3 weeks, Djokovic just turns up for the odd slam. it would create a bit more simplicity from that perspective.
I agree, but what I said in replies to either Nick or Noah, but I think they largely ignored me, is that these 250s, when you go to them, for the most part, they are really important events to the grassroots tennis community that hosts them. If you go to any of these, that every tennis club within 50 miles of these 250s will have people going, and it's the sort of highlight of the year, and it's their Wimbledon to an extent, when they're run well, that is. And I think losing those events, and the idea that, I went to Antwerp this year, and it's not a very big tournament, and Murray pulled out, which was slightly frustrating, but they would have had a tournament that had Andy Murray, Dominic Thiem, David Goffin, who's obviously the local hero, Jack Draper as well, an up-and-comer, and it's like, well, that's not the most star-studded event in the world, and there weren't that many brilliant matches, but for that town and for that tennis community, it's really important. And you can't underestimate the importance of going and watching live tennis when it comes to creating a lifelong fan. And to bring it back to the exhibitions, that's what frustrates me about the tournaments in the Middle East. Is I appreciate that tennis communities don't come out of nowhere. You have to build them, and if you build it, they will come. That's the idea, but I don't think that's why those events are run. They're either run to sports wash a murderous regime in certain cases, to sports wash or to sanitize the reputation of a country, or to basically run a business networking event that high flyers want to come to. None of those things create a grassroots tennis culture, and I think that's what the tour needs to be doing, as well as creating an attractive product to the top for people to come and watch. I think it also needs to understand that tennis will only fulfill itself by continually creating this grassroots structure. You talk to anyone in America who thinks they haven't got time on court anymore because of pickleball, that's what they think will kill tennis. George?
Do we think there's a world at some point where we, say, have 8 to 10 slams a year and that's it, where top players play out? Do you think they'll reach that combustible point of the calendar where it actually just becomes like a kind of minutiae, because they're going to be so annoyed at just how much they're being farmed out, how far they're having to go, etc.
Well, I'll tell you how I think there is a world where that happens, and I'll tell you how it will happen. And basically, because it's already happened in golf. I hate to draw the comparison again, but someone, whether it be Saudi Arabia or Kazakhstan or whichever flavour of the month country wants to mask its regime that month, will turn up with $50 billion and say, we'll guarantee you this much prize money, you only had to play 8 times a year, and they will all do it. I don't think there's a tennis player on tour, maybe Murray notwithstanding, and I don't know, some of the gay players that we don't know exist, as Taylor Fritz was talking about this week. But I think almost all of them will take the cash and go, yep, absolutely. As probably we all would, and it's hard to make moral judgments about that.
It's funny you say that. Go on, sorry, James. I
just think that's when the tours will have to react, as the DP World Tour are now doing and the same with the PGA Tour in golf, as they are now doing. They've reacted, changed what they're doing, in order to come closer to that.
It's funny you say that, and I agree that might happen. But you say that everybody will do it, and we come back to Nick Kyrgios again, who likes to sort of push himself, and George himself likes to promote him as this kind of really sort of nice liberal guy. But he's the one who will push for it the most, because he's the one who keeps saying he wants to play less tennis for more money, and he doesn't care about anybody who's not as good as him.
Yeah.
So he was the sort of person who you would hope would come and stand against it and go, no, this is how it has to be. But he's not. He'll burn the whole thing to the ground if it means he earns a little bit more money and has to play less tennis.
But funnily enough, I actually think Kyrgios is more likely to be on the other side of the slam.
He's already proven that he's not.
Yeah.
No, I think the exhibition is a bit different. But
no, George, you've got to stop making excuses for him. He's one of the worst people in the whole game, and you constantly make these excuses for him.
I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying I think naming him the person who's most likely to do it, you clearly don't follow the Riley Opelka, John Isner campaign.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But
they're openly that kind of people, aren't they? They're Republican voting Trumpists, whereas Kyrgios likes to promote himself as like a nice guy, or you think he is, but he's one of the people who's there. You're constantly going on about how he's a good guy. You'll defend him for anything.
I won't. I honestly won't. I agree with you to the point, but I do also think there's a bit of a romantic in him about the kind of slams and stuff, which he talks about. He'd retire immediately if he won a slam. Now, whether we take that as true or not, I think there is just something
that is
a bit
the problem
about
as well, isn't it? Like, what do you take as
sanctity about the slams? And I kind of feel like Rafa probably at this stage of his career wouldn't bother going over because it's too late. Whereas Novak's actively said in the past, why wouldn't we move Wimbledon to Abu Dhabi to get more money? So, but even then, Novak would be so precious about the records that I kind of can't see him like sacrificing the slams to move to a new tour if it meant he couldn't compete in them.
I tell you what I can see. I can see him doing a Greg Norman. I could like after he retires, like maybe being the sort of TD for Wimbledon, Abu Dhabi, or Mubadala US Open. But yeah.
For the non-slam winning group beneath, not to tar them all with the same brush, or people who are unlikely to ever win a slam, I agree. I think all of them would muck around. I think there's like a small handful of people who can realistically win Grand Slams at the minute, and that's why I think Kyrgios is potentially one of the ones who might fancy himself to win one compared to the rest of them who probably think, we're pretty underpaid considering how good we are at our sport compared to other people who are more well numerated in other sports.
Very good. To sort of segue, one of Nick Kyrgios went to this exhibition and then lost his first round match. So he's not as good as he says he is. But I'll tell you what, there are many upsides in these exhibitions. But the best thing was that one of them had a rule where if you lost your first round match, you automatically had to play doubles the next day, and you had to play with the other first round loser, which pitted Nick Kyrgios and Stefanos Tsitsipas into the same doubles pairing, which might be can you imagine when they realised they had to do that? Anyway, Tsitsipas got asked about it this week. How did you find it? And he said, well, what can I say? Tough to concentrate for sure. I don't know where that energy comes from. There's just so much of it. You want to go about your thing. You want to concentrate on your own half of the court. There's just noise coming from the other side of it. It's distracting. It's not easy. Calvin, worst doubles clash of personalities you've ever seen?
I found that it did make me chuckle a little bit, that because Kyrgios is a much better doubles player than Stefanos Tsitsipas is. And also, and I'm going to be like a bit of a doubles coach nerd here, the thing that really wound me up there was I just want to concentrate on my own half of the court. Like, philosophically, that's a terrible thing to say in doubles. And actually, like, objectively as well, and this is like really nerdy of me, like no doubles player is ever covering half a court. That's not how doubles is played. Like, you're never covering 50%. One person is always covering about 70% of the court.
That is nerdy. That was a fun story and you've made it nerdy. Well done.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kyrgios says he's going to play doubles at Indian Wells next year with Djokovic if Djokovic is allowed into the US. I reckon Novak might want to have a word with Stefanos because I feel like he might struggle with that energy. But I don't know.
That sort of thing, though, that annoys me again, though, as well. I mean, it's more just this nonsense, like, loving that those two are having now, where it's like, was always fake the other way. I think it's a little bit fake now. But also, they're going to play, right? And they would be, if they played full out, they'd be a phenomenal pair. But they won't. One of them will pull out. It's stopping someone getting in the draw. They're going to play one. If they play together, if they do end up playing together, they'll play maybe 1/2 matches, and then one of them will pull out. 100% guaranteed. And that doesn't help anything.
No. They might sell a few more tickets in India Wells. Yeah.
I was going to say, that you're kind of counterbalancing the potential crowd and focus on doubling that argument, aren't you, I suppose? But let's hope they prove Calvin wrong and go and win the Indian Wells doubles title.
If Djokovic, we'll say it's Djokovic or either, well, put it this way, if either of them are still in the singles come the third round of the doubles, they'll pull out of the doubles. And if either of them has gone out come the third round of the doubles, they'll pull out, because they don't want to be hanging around playing doubles. They want to get to Miami. That's how it will work. They won't go past the third round, and it won't because somebody will beat them necessarily. Someone might beat them, but it won't necessarily be because of that.
And will it be a real tournament if you don't beat Novak Djokovic and win it? Another stellar segue from me. This is something Nick Kyrgios said either this week or last week. If you win a tournament and you don't face Novak Djokovic, then you kind of know that tournament isn't a real tournament, referring to the 2 slams that Djokovic was banned from last year, as well as the US swing. By the way, by this metric, Nick Kyrgios has never won a real tournament because he's never faced Novak Djokovic and won a tournament, George.
And there's never been a tournament before 2007 that's deemed worthy.
I mean, I think that's a bit. I think I think he does mean like while Djokovic is on the scene. Do you think? I mean, I suppose we've discussed this a bit before, but do we think that like Nadal's Australian Open and Alcaraz's US Open are slightly lesser for not having faced Novak Djokovic last year?
I mean, I do, like in terms of, if Djokovic is at those tournaments, I fancy him to win them. But in terms of it's all Djokovic's fault and players have missed tournaments throughout history for various different reasons, that's kind of life. But what I would say is there's been no player better than Nadal at just rolling through tournaments when something else has happened to someone else. And he has really maximised his slam wins in Djokovic's disasters, for want of another word. Like he's been very good at that over the years. And Alcaraz has maybe shown it's a good Spanish trade,
That was really bad. I mean, I do some dodgy accents on this podcast, but that's real. Like, to the extent that I wasn't really sure if you were doing Nadal or Alcaraz until you said no.
I was just doing Spaniards.
Oh, right, just general Spaniards.
Yeah, just general xenophobia.
Calvin, not a real tournament unless you've beaten Novak Djokovic. I assume you agree with Nick Kyrgios as always.
No, it's just nonsense. Like, it's just like... Something like the stuff he says, I don't know when we're just going to get to the point where we're just going to go like, this guy's just an idiot. He's like a simpleton. And we just give him more credit than he deserves all the time. 80% of what comes out of his mouth is just, it's all based on what he wants to be the case rather than objectively making any sense with anything. It's kind of like, what are we at to now then? Like, so we just put Djokovic straight into the final of tournaments.
Oh, like the America's Cup.
Yeah, Great. It's not boxing. It's like not boxing where you have to beat the champion. That's not how it works.
I'd be up for that as well, by the way. George.
I mean, seeing as you've mentioned boxing there, I was just going to say, I mean, Kyrgios is becoming more and more just Tyson Fury-esque in terms of like, it's pure promotion, chatting nonsense. I think we're all at the stage on this podcast where we think he's an idiot. I think he's quite an entertaining idiot, as I do with Tyson Fury, and I think they're very talented, but that you do have to take everything they say with a giant shaker of salt.
Yeah. Look at the Champions League in football, right? The best team in Europe actually only wins the Champions League about 40% of the time. Like for one reason or another, with knockouts and that kind of thing. So and no one sits there and goes, oh well, it doesn't really count. Because Man City have been the best team in Europe for about the last 3 or 4 years and they haven't won it. Yeah. No one sits there and goes, oh well, it doesn't count because Man City didn't win it.
And you never go, oh, they had an easy run. Like, you never go, oh, well, who did you really beat? Like, even with Alcaraz's US Open, when he kind of like, objectively, there was a slightly easier run just because of the field. But I don't think any of us sit here and go, oh, well, that doesn't really count, does it? Because he had an easy run. Like, he won the bloody US Open. Like, the occasion is as much the challenge as anything else as who's on the other side of the net.
I mean, Djokovic, and look, I'm never going to criticise Djokovic's running in slams because he's won much more competitive ones than Federer or Nadal have. But the last couple of Wimbledons he's won haven't been overly strong.
No, because everyone's crap on grass, to be fair.
Yeah. So
and because he annihilates big servers. So like it's like, well, everyone's bad on grass, and then you take the sort of 4 blokes in the top 50 who have one big weapon that's quite tricky on grass, and he's incredible at it. I don't know.
Like Murray's 2 Wimbledons. He didn't beat Djokovic in them. So are we not counting them? He had pretty nice runs in both Wimbledons. Didn't he? I beat him in one final. Sorry, I'm thinking he beat
Raonic.
Raonic was the other one. Yeah,
but he beat a weird Djokovic. I mean, if we're going to talk about types of Djokovic as well. That was one of the weirdest Djokovic matches I've
Djokovic
ever
was
seen
the
him
second
play.
one, right? 2016.
No,
No,
it
it
was
was the first one. 2016.
Raonic was 2016.
I see. 2016, incidentally, which, and people will have heard this on the radio, Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe watched from an Iranian prison, and she did an incredibly moving interview with Andy Murray. If you look on my Twitter feed, I posted a link to it. It was on Today programme earlier this week, where she told him that, and Murray actually got incredibly emotional hearing about it, which it was pretty moving, and I think a lot of people found it similarly moving. After the break, we're going to talk about the United Cup. We're going to talk about the Forbes list of highest paid female athletes, and we'll answer your questions on Twitter.
I want to be quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Not later, now. I want to own the pocket, make plays, drop dimes to my receivers. I want to feel 80,000 fans on my shoulders as I carry them to victory. You know, nothing major.
This holiday, make your extraordinary wishes come true in virtual reality with NFL Pro Era on MetaQuest 2. Buy now at meta.com/quest. MetaQuest 2 for ages 13+.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis podcast with me, James Gray of inews.co.uk, and the iNewspaper. I've got George Bellshaw and Calvin Betton as always. We were talking before the break about Nick Kyrgios. One tournament he's not playing, whether he regards it as real or not, I'm not sure, is the United Cup. Quite disappointing actually for the tournament. He pulled out just a few hours before it started. He said people underestimate the pressure and the nerves with being a part of one of the biggest tournaments of the year. Throwing an injury and knowing you didn't give yourself the best chance only adds to the mountain of pressure you face. So feeling good physically is important. He says he's injured and therefore won't play in the United Cup, which got underway last night. Britain took a 2-0 lead over Australia. Greece going well, beat 2-0 up against Bulgaria. And the US have started strong as well. For people who don't know the format of the United Cup, it's group stages, countries. The ties are best of 5 rubbers. Number 1 singles against number 1 singles in men's and women's, and then number 2 against number 2 in men's and women's, and a mixed doubles tied to decide it if required. It's not necessarily otherwise hugely innovative, Calvin, but it basically looks like a pretty good formula from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I was saying in our group chat earlier, I quite like the format. I don't really know how you get around it, but I don't like the 2-day thing. I think you don't get the feeling of. I quite like the idea of getting the whole match done in a day.
If you're a fan, it's a slightly unsatisfying, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't know where you stand, and then if you get the second day, it can all be over after one match.
Yeah.
If Britain win the first match tomorrow, as I expect they should. Who's on first? Women?
I think it's Evo against Jason Kubler.
So I know he lost to him at Wimbledon, but he would be heavy favourite. So then the tie's over.
But they will still play because there's sets difference and match difference to decide the group.
And presumably ranking points going with it.
Well, yes, there are ranking points involved. I cannot remember exactly how or why. I think it's actually about what round you get to rather than maybe specific. I can't remember, I'm sorry. I did mean to look that up.
But for like Swan and Dart, you imagine it'll be enough to have some motivation to be carried win these matches.
Well, Katie Swan, who beat Zoe Hives today quite impressively in straight sets. I mean, Zoe Hives had a lot of injury problems, and this is kind of probably the one pitfall of the tournament is that Katie Swan against Zoe Hives is not going to push the needle really, and there's quite a lot of matchups like that. Because entry is based on your top-ranked player. For example, Norway have Kasper Ruud and Viktor Durasovic, who is clearly not of the same calibre. But yeah, for someone like Katie Swan, any ranking points of that kind of level, I think it's basically 500, ATP 500 ranking points. So that'll ladder down and will do her a lot of favours.
Just on the players. Not with the most attractive matches. I'll admit, I did kind of take the mick a little bit this afternoon about some of the ones that were on. But what I would say, in fairness, is that one of the good things about the Davis Cup was those kind of heroes that you just wouldn't expect. And I think someone like James Ward really springs to mind here.
Coventry against Russia.
Kind of nothing in his career in a nice way. He's a solid enough pro, but he was quite well known in British tennis because he would turn up and win the odd kind of massive Davis Cup match. So there is something to be said that, Katie Swan could seal a big tie in the semi-finals and, become well known through that route, I suppose. But
Well, she may become well known in Australia, George, but again, possibly the other great problem with this is that, well, look, Australian tennis tournaments are hard to sell over here because they're either on overnight or the night session starts about 8 a.m. and runs to about midday. And TV companies don't care about those hours. They're not useful. They're not going to push numbers. But the fact that there was no UK TV channel showing this tournament until about 3 hours before it started is pretty remarkable. So, fortunately, if you do want to watch it and keep up with it over the next 10 days, because it is a week and a half tournament, it's all free on YouTube. If you look for the United Cup YouTube channel, all the matches are streamed on there, and it's great. It's really good. And, you know, all the mics, the coaches are all mic'd up, so you can hear what's going on there in the corners, which I just find completely fascinating. But, yeah, you know, it's going to be a hard sell to a UK audience, which is why it's particularly disappointing that Kyrgios has pulled out, because we would have had Kyrgios-Norrie this morning, and that would have penetrated a bit, and probably made a bit of a difference to how much people cared over here, but, you know, c'est la vie. Always nice as well to see Dan Evans like in a team box. Like, I mean, Calvin, you know Evo well, and he's just the most competitive bloke in the world. But it is quite fun watching him basically just be a sort of football fan at a tennis match.
He was a bit quiet today, I thought. Although somebody said he's been ill.
Oh yeah, he's not been well. Yeah,
or maybe he just couldn't get a word in because Tim Henman never shut up.
Tim Henman is the GB captain, and yeah, like, what do you make of his coaching style, Calvin?
Well, there wasn't any, was there? It was just like generic cliches that he was just, well, right here we go. He said, like, at one stage, he said, get a look at a second serve to Katie Swan. Like, she has no control over that. You know, and then I was like, what does that even mean? Get a look at a second serve. And it was amazing, really. I mean, it's a difficult one because you kind of like feel that you've got to say something. I was thinking that when I was watching it, and I do like Tim, to be fair. Like, I don't know him overly well, but he's always been pleasant with me. But you got the feeling he felt like he had to make an impression, and that's what he knew. He was mic'd up. He had to make an impression. He just went in overload. But
it was fun because, especially with Norrie, like, I don't imagine Norrie and Tim Henman have a huge amount of rapport. Like, Norrie's barely been in Britain quite a lot of his career. I can't imagine they've crossed paths very much.
I think they will know each other fairly well, to be fair, because they're both, like, you know, they'll both be at Wimbledon a fair bit. They'll both be members there.
Well, they hid it well, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah,
because it was like they'd never met.
And
he was destroying de Minaur, so.
Yeah, he was. He played very well, didn't he? Must have been that extra hitting he did in Saudi that brought his form up. But yeah, I just thought it quite. I hope. I mean, the thing is that the last ATP Cup, I'm told that Henman was excellent in terms. I don't think they were mic'd up then, but I'm told that his advice during the matches at the change of ends was really excellent. Which is odd that he went today for just sort of generic Ted Lasso, like Nick Bollettieri motivational ranting. Really, who
is the more inspiring captain, Tim Henman on today's form or Petros Tsitsipas?
well, I mean, the thing is, right? I've got it's quite funny because I've got a mate who he loves this sport, but he's got this idea about, like, he doesn't really understand the basis of, like, causation. Causation isn't the same as correlation. And so whoever a football manager is, like, he insists that Didier Deschamps the best manager in the world because he's won a World Cup and made a final of another. And I always go, like, well, he's got the best squad. He's done more harm to that squad than he has good stuff. So then, I messaged him today going, like, you see, you know, oh no, he messaged me going, like, you were criticising Petros yesterday, but his brother just beat Dimitrov. I'm like, I'm not having that. Like, you're not having that. Like, he's five in the world, but he was serious. So this is the thing, he was serious, and he was like, well, you know, can't count him out. It's a win for him. Like, right, this is just ludicrous. Like, but yeah, is he playing doubles, Petros, or not?
Well, he's not.
Surely they wouldn't. Stefanos going to play, isn't he, if they need it?
Well, yeah, I'm
sure they both play.
It's scheduled as Stefanos and Sakari.
Mixed.
It's mixed.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, we can mock Petros as much as we want, but they got wins in both singles and women's singles, and not a Sakari win, which, you can't fault his 100% record.
I mean,
this could be his new calling, Petros. Petros the coach.
I'll be honest, George, I don't know a lot about Isabella Shinikova, who is the Bulgarian number 2, and in fairness, equally, I don't know a huge amount about the Greek
Papa
number
Mikhail.
2, Papa Mikhail, either, but I'm struggling to think it was a huge upset.
If Petros Tsitsipas guides Greece to this title, will we all bow down and confirm he's tennis's greatest coach of all time?
Look, I'll tell you this. I don't know. I mean, Calvin, you know Petros a bit and have been around. Like, by all accounts, he's a reasonably nice guy. And if Apostolos is going to be there anyway because he's Stefanos' coach, and like maybe the Greek Federation don't want to fly anyone out, additionally, then why not have someone who's a bit of a hype man and just a nice bloke? I mean, when Leon Smith got the Davis Cup job, everyone was like, well, why has he got the job?
Well, I mean, it's the number 1 player chooses the captain. So
Yeah.
Stefanos chooses it. Like, no one else gets a say in it.
Well, I mean, yeah, but like, what I mean is, why shouldn't Petros Tsitsipas be captain of the Greece team?
It's strange because last year, though, it was just it was just the players, wasn't it? One of the players took it, or the non-playing.
In the ATP Cup?
Yeah.
I think, was that still kind of a COVID restricted issue, though, that they could
I think it was, yeah.
winged random people to just come and stand on
And
the
then
sideline.
Australia seemed to have 2 today. It seemed to be Hewitt in the men's and Stosur when the women were playing.
Yeah, I thought that was weird. I didn't really understand that either. That was very odd. Yeah, I mean, look, for me, I suppose we're kind of splitting hairs here. It doesn't really matter. Like, the most important thing to me was they were mic'd up and I could listen to what they were saying, because that's genuinely fascinating. And I think it really made the broadcast more accessible, because you could hear, I mean, watching Dimitrov against Tsitsipas, and, Jamie Delgado is now Dimitrov's coach, and literally all Delgado was saying was like, just keep hitting it to his backhand. And at one point, Dimitrov hit this approach. He hit a forehand approach, cross court to the Tsitsipas forehand, and got past. And he sat down, and Delgado was like, "Why didn't you take it down?" Liza, I saw him moving. I saw him moving already, so I went cross court to go back behind him. And he's like, "Doesn't matter. Just hit it to his backhand. Just hit it to his exact words were, nail his fucking backhand." and to be fair, Dimitrov got pretty close to beating him, and Tsitsipas served like a beast in the final set tiebreak. But yeah, it ticks a lot of boxes for me. So, as you know, I'm happy about it. Can we talk about the Forbes list of highest paid female athletes in 2022? Because I know that it's extremely well-sourced and accurate information that requires us. The top 5 is Naomi Osaka, Serena Williams, Eileen Gu, who is a skier and snowboarder, Emma Raducanu, and Iga Swiatek. Perhaps most fascinatingly, the top 4's on-court or on-field earnings totals 2.2 million, whereas Iga Swiatek's totals 9.9 million. What have we learnt here, chaps?
Well, the first thing I'll do is the positive spin, being the ever positive person I am.
Forbes will be delighted.
I still think it's really refreshing and a good thing that women's tennis is comfortably the best paid female sport out there, and continues to smash every other sport and lead the way by creating these marketable athletes. So I think that's a really positive thing for tennis. And as we're a tennis podcast, I think we should acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What I think we have, and this really actually isn't a point about just the women's list, because it's been the same on the men's list. I think it's really interesting, the dynamic now between sports earnings versus sports marketability and off-court or off-field earnings. And it just feels to me like that side of things has never felt more kind of such a huge chasm the other way. And Federer's, exactly the same on the men's side. Federer once topped the men's list basically on about 80 million off-field earnings and about 100 grand of on-court earnings while he was off injured.
I mean, I'm pretty sure
know,
Kei Nishikori's in the top 10 biggest earning tennis players this year.
Yeah,
for example.
It happens all the time. I just feel a bit of sadness actually for Swiatek, most of all, that she's not considered this great marketable athlete comparatively. And I hope that builds, because I think I know you can't force it down people's throats to have a marketable athlete, and it's great. Osaka and Williams are really powerful figures in the kind of external world. But we always say sport is the last standing meritocracy. And that doesn't actually feel like the case when you see figures like this sometimes. And that does jar me a little bit, but, it's still good from a big picture that tennis is up there and these very powerful voices are kicking around at the top of the marketability stakes and keeping eyes on the sport.
Do you think...
If only they played a bit more.
Yeah, well, exactly. I'm kind of hesitant to say this, but I want to kind of interrogate why Iga Świątek doesn't have massive deals. I mean, I can imagine to an extent that she probably doesn't want to have lots of sponsor kind of what's the word? Obligations. For example, she said this week that she kept the Netflix cameras out of her way quite a lot because she wanted to focus on the matches. I appreciate it's not the same thing as someone offering you $5 million to take one picture with a watch, but you know what I mean. I wonder, and I am really hesitant to say this, whether it's just a look thing. Iga Świątek's just sort of quite ordinary. I always look at her and think, if she walked down the street, you'd be like, oh, there's a person. Whereas someone like Naomi Osaka or Serena Williams, they're very striking looking women. And, in the end, a lot of their off-field earnings, rightly or wrongly, are based on their looks. So, that it's sort of modelling stuff. Certainly Raducanu it is.
I think that the thing you hear most often when you have these conversations with people behind the scenes is they always talk about the markets they're hitting.
Right.
And if you think about Osaka and Williams, they're American or linked to America. Osaka's got the Japanese market, which, as we've spoken about with Kei Nishikori,
huge, is
in itself such a huge market. Raducanu's got the British market with the Chinese market kind of factored in. You can't underestimate that ability to kind of just speak Chinese and hit an audience like that.
Eileen Gu is, half Chinese, half American. It's huge.
Yeah. So that is always one kind of angle. The other things you hear banded around over the years, and I'll prefix this with me saying I totally disagree with this happening if this is the case. Right. Is our name sounds sometimes people over the years, I think particularly mainstream media, have been guilty of this in terms of how do you spell Shevchenko or something? That over kind of has put people off in the past. And Sharapova was a bit of I would say someone who broke that mold, but you might argue then that plays into the kind of patriarchal side of she was a very attractive white woman, and similar with Kornikova. So there's a lot of kind of market forces at play. Who's got the big money? Typically, which wealthy white men in the kind of previous times. I know there's changing landscapes on that, but that's often been a kind of conversation. Can I spell and say their name? Is Świątek obvious to say?
No,
if you look at it,
not at all.
Świątek.
Yeah.
It sounds stupid, but that is often some of the things that people talk about who work in these industries, and it's not how it should be. And the hope is Świątek becomes such a dominating force, and we all know she speaks out about a lot of issues and it is willing to put herself forward and is an interesting character. But sometimes it just takes a long time for certain players. If they have that dominance, though, they will get that recognition. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. I'm just making sure that I'm not required at work because I'm reliably informed that Pele has just died, which is something that we've been dreading for the last couple of weeks. But I think we're quite well prepared for it. Anyway, Calvin, you've got lots of friends who work in this field, sports marketing, that is, not Pele dying. I don't know what field that would be. What do you think they would say if asked why is Iga Świątek not a multi-millionaire rather than just a multi-millionaire?
I think George has probably summed it up pretty well there. Also, the country that they're from, you don't get many, as I've said before, you don't get many Polish superstars. They've probably had, over the last 2 or 3 years, they've probably had the best footballer in the world.
Yeah.
Or certainly one of the three best footballers in the world. But anybody who doesn't follow football seriously probably doesn't know who that is. I expect, though, with Swiatek, I think that she will start making mega bucks. I think she's one of those whose marketability will start to depend on her dominance in the game. And I think as she keeps on winning more and more, then that will sort of be her USP, if that makes sense. And I think if you're looking for a similar one, Djokovic did that before he started getting weird about vaccines and all of the kinds of shit that he got weird about. His real sort of thing was he was pretty uninteresting until he just started winning all the time. And then that's when he started getting the big deals. When he got did he get a Uniqlo deal? He was with Uniqlo for a bit, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was Uniqlo before Federer, and then he moved on to Lacoste. And that's quite an interesting point there, because what I was going to say is, like, in the football realm, the other way to kind of counteract your own country is to move to a club. You have something by association. And Djokovic, you might argue, his big thing really was the clubs he was competing against. He became the big rival to the Manchester United and Liverpool of the tennis world, who were Federer and Nadal, and he became, say, the Manchester City, if you like. You kind of create this own bubble where you become bigger than the sum of your marketable parts, if you like. And that's not to say that Djokovic isn't marketable in his own way. He's a good-looking guy. He's, interesting. He speaks lots of languages. But in terms of that obvious marketability, it's taken a long time for him to kind of catch up with Federer and Nadal, and ultimately to surpass Nadal quite comfortably, really, in the more recent years.
Let's move on, shall we? Because we've got so much to get through, and I want to get to people's questions, which is the most important thing. You, the listener, are the most important person in this podcast, quite frankly, while we might think it's us. We're going to start with Elena, I should say, who sent us lots of questions and is a long-time listener and fan of the podcast, and always very avid. I'm going to start with number one, which is, what's Calvin's estimation for Patton cash in the main tour? They're making... This is their, I guess, their ATP main tour debut next week, is that right?
Well, they play Wimbledon. And they played Eastbourne.
Oh yeah, Eastbourne, okay. Well,
it's their first, the one that they've, unqualified.
Right, okay.
Without a wild card.
Which is exciting, and they're playing in Pune. I mean, obviously you're going to back them to do really well, but like, what's the step up likely to be like?
I think it depends on draws, really, because there's many pairs who they've played against and beaten who are ranked higher than them still.
Yeah.
And who've won 250s. The San Diego 250 last year, or earlier this year, sorry, was won by Lamans and Witherow, who Henry and Julian really battered in the final the week before. They were 6-1, 5-2 up, and then a bizarre set of circumstances with mishits and net cords allowed them back into it, and they ended up winning that match 10-8, and then went on to win a 250 the week after. But if they played next week, I would expect that Henry and Jules would beat them comfortably, because they're a good pair there. They're underranked at the minute still at 69, 70. I think they're much higher than that in real terms.
So their plan for the next month, it's Pune and then Adelaide, is that right? And then
Pune, Adelaide, Australia, and then this is where it becomes weird now with the doubles into what you can get in, because then it becomes difficult getting into anything in the 250s, and the Masters are the real difficult ones to get in, just because you do get a lot of singles guys who play them.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to have to get into the top 40 to get into the Masters.
I see.
And you'd think that doesn't seem loads going from 70 to 40, but it takes a hell of a lot of. I mean, if you look at last year, like Lloyd Glasspool last year with his partner Harry Helivara were ranked 79, so they were lower than Henry and Julian, and they had a phenomenal year, absolutely phenomenal year. I think they made 9 finals, and they went up. They only just sneaked into Turin at that.
Well, when Henry and Julian win the Australian Open, they'll be flying up the rankings. No
Yeah,
doubt.
I mean, joking aside, it's quite important, the Australian Open, and why they could do with a good draw, because that's where the big points are at the Slams and the Masters. It's difficult to climb the doubles ranking just on 250s, even if you can get into the 250s.
I see. Well, it's exciting times anyway. We should preface all of the difficulties with they're good problems to have, I believe football managers like to say. Next from Elena, who will have the better year out of Draper, Shelton and Rune? One word answers I might request here. George, you can go first.
Oh, can I have 10 words? I think Rune on ranking, but Draper will have the more progressive year.
Calvin?
Draper, yeah, he's the best player out of those three.
I think I would agree with George tentatively. Rune, I think.
Jack's a better player than Rune.
I really hope they play. I hope they play a lot. I hope they're because they're almost the same age, aren't they? They're almost exactly the same age.
Maybe same year, but Jack's late. Jack's birthday was only last week. So.
Right. Okay. Very good. There's a question about Djokovic and Nadal dominating the Grand Slams, which I think we'll come to a little bit later on. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip that. Are there any contenders to Iga's dominance? I mean, it's a question we ask almost every week, but who do we feel in the water might contend with her this year? Anyone got a reasonable answer?
I mean, there's the two obvious ones. Osaka, if she actually plays tennis. But I doubt she'd challenge the dominance, because I don't think even if Osaka comes back and starts winning again, she won't play a proper full schedule. So it's unlikely they'll do that. And then the other obvious one, I suppose, is Goff. But she gets nowhere near to Swiatek at the minute. So,
George?
Yeah, I think it'll be the biggest shock of next year if anyone other than Swiatek's number one in the women's game at all.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. I mean, I would say Goff. I'm pretty sure we'll see Goff in at least 2 Grand Slam finals this year. I'm just kind of starting to feel like that consistency's coming, but yeah, hard to go beyond. Right, Eleanor, we'll come back to your other questions next week, or we'll try to anyway. Mikey Middleton says, do you chaps think that Breakpoint on Netflix will help usher in a new post-GOAT era in tennis fandom? Create some new stars like Felix Auger-Aliassime, for example, who could be huge, but I worry that attention equals distraction. What are our thoughts? George, you want to take this one?
It's always hard to say without seeing the thing, but I don't think it will hurt. It's nice starting from a base of a random set of characters rather than just like a sole, Murray, Federer, Djokovic, or Nadal documentary about someone we know really well, or even kind of King Richard, like the kind of film adaptations where we already know the player and it feels like we've reached the point where we're building up the player rather than the sport now. So yeah, it certainly can't hurt. I've not seen it, so I don't want to commit to being like, oh yeah, this is guaranteed to nail in young fans, because ultimately it has to still be good. People aren't going to go and watch a tennis documentary unless there's word of mouth around, oh wow, this is really interesting and really contentious and people are fighting and it's really cool. And I suspect, given the lack I've seen about it, that there's probably a lack of stuff like that at the minute, or they're just not promoting it that well. So we'll have to wait and see. I know you've watched a little bit, haven't you, James? I'm not sure what you can actually say or
I'm not allowed to say anything. It's embargoed.
There we go. Embargoed. No
yeah,
words.
So I'm not allowed to write about it. I'm not allowed to tweet about it. I'm not allowed to have any sentiment about it. So I haven't even had a feeling about it. I have dispassionately watched it. But so it comes out the week before the Australian Open, and our views are embargoed until then. Because I'm flying to Australia, very exciting news, taking the podcast to Australia on the 8th of January. What I will do, I think, is record an episode, like kind of maybe a Q&A with you, George, or something, like so that I can get some of it, and I'll put it to come out straight away. It probably will have spoilers in it, so maybe don't listen to it if you want to watch it, but I will definitely do something on it. Right. Let's move on. Tim Mason, another regular listener, says, who were the most underappreciated players on tour, i.e. they were missed and it caught you by surprise? I suppose this is referring to 2022 and guys you maybe didn't expect to have the year that they had, or who kind of stepped up in a way that you didn't expect? I mean, for me, I think it might be Holger Rune, because, you know, he's someone who... I mean, incidentally, the answer to this for all three of us is always Cam Norrie, because he has consistently outperformed our expectations of him. But yeah, I think it might be Holger Rune, because I just didn't think he could make such fast progress. And also fulfill his own expectations of himself so quickly. Usually when you hear someone talking like that, you know, there's a deficit. But yeah, for me, I think that's who I'd choose. Calvin?
I'd say Rune's an interesting one, though. He had a great end to the year, but he wasn't that great throughout the year. He kind of like had spells where he struggled. And I'm interested to know whether to see whether he carries that form on from the end of the year.
Or to see whether it's a spike or whether it's a
whether it was
gradient.
Just he was on a good run of form, which it could have been.
Yeah. I mean, a run of form that got him to 10 in the world as well, to be fair.
Yeah, but you can do that at the end of the year, though. I think that's something that can happen.
George?
I've kind of taken this question slightly differently, in the sense of I was thinking about it as like a player I think we'd really miss if they were gone.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually do think the one, I know you guys take the mick out of me because I do mention him a lot, but the one I've really missed watching at the top of the game has been Thiem. I really, really enjoyed him at the top of his game. And so while I'm hoping there's a good comeback, I think it's been sad for tennis in a similar way to Del Potro when he kind of went off at the top of his game and had those injuries and vanished, that we're missing someone who I think can regularly challenge the top guys, has a good mentality and a good game style. So that's kind of how I was taking it, and any excuse to bring Thiem up on this podcast, because he's my real favourite, despite you lot mocking me about Kyrgios all the time. He's the one I really like the most.
There's the bloke we'd really miss. We'd really miss Nick Kyrgios if he... No, I mean... I don't. We
have spent a lot of time talking about him today, to be fair, so I think we would miss him to a degree.
Yes, I agree. Right, I've got one more question from Angry Bird Star, who asked predictions for performance major results rankings of top American women. It's quite a specific question. I've picked out the 4 in the top 20 who are at the moment in order: Pegula, Goff, Keys, Collins. I'd like you to tell me how many and which ones of those will still be in the top 20 this time next year. George, you look like you've already
say the 4 again.
Pegula, Goff,
Collins.
Keys and Collins.
Oh god, that's a hard question. So who will still be in the top 20? I hope Pegula's still there, because I think she's really kicked on and been very consistent. Goff will definitely be there. Keys is pretty consistently up and around top 20, so back here. I'd say Collins is the most at risk of dropping out if I was to pick one. But I think there's a good chance they'll all be there at the end of the year.
Calvin, do you share George's confidence?
There's a good chance, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think Keys is probably the one that could drop out, because she can be inconsistent. She's capable of having big dips in form. You keep thinking Anisimova is going to come in there as well, but I noticed that she just seems to have spent the off season in nightclubs in Miami. And,
I saw Ben Rothenberg and Alex Gruskin had tried to rank their American players at the top at the start of one year and the next, and it is a hard game. I mean,
there's so many of them.
It might be a fun one for us to try and do.
Well, I'll tell you one to watch who I watched a bit of in the back half of the season, where she's just come back from injury, I think, is Alicia Parks. She's 75 in the world at the moment, which makes her the American number 12, which is a real testament to the strength and depth of American women's tennis. But I think she's someone who you might see maybe not join that group, but not far off. Raducanu versus Parks ranking improvement might be an interesting one next year. George?
Yeah. I was going to say, I think one of the players, one of the things that did make me laugh about their list is one of them ludicrously put Sophia Kenin as their top-ranked player they were predicting.
What, were they hoping her protected ranking would last another year? Right. I'll tell you what, there's so much to talk about in the coaching roundabout. We're going to go into an unprecedented part 3, if everyone has time and is willing to do it. After the break, we'll be talking about Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic, Ivan Lubicic, and yes, another new coach for Emma Raducanu. Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podcast. Might be the final time ever, in fact, to the Love Tennis Podcast, because there is a change coming. More on that later. I've just paid an invoice. That's how exciting it is.
Has it happened?
It hasn't happened technically, George, but it's in motion. And that's all I can say about it.
A bid has been lodged in the transfer window to be completed January 1st.
If you saw my Christmas tweet on Love Tennis Pod Twitter account, then you will have some idea of what is coming. Anyway, there are changes afoot everywhere in the tennis world, in coaching teams. As always, there's been one in the Rafael Nadal camp. He's got rid of Francisco Roig, who is a long-serving member of the team. He's now actually full-time with Sloane Stephens, interestingly. But Nadal has replaced him with Gustavo Marcaccio, who has been at the Nadal Academy and is now going to travel with Marc Lopez et al. George, I don't think there's too much to read into that necessarily. I mean, coaching changes happen, although actually not that often in the Nadal team. Maybe more interesting for me to ask you about Rafa Nadal's long-term future. He was asked this week in Australia whether he thought it might be his last time down there as a professional player. He said, hopefully not. When you're at the age of 36, you never know when it's going to be the last one. It's obvious, but don't like to talk about that because I'm not in the mood now. Just focus on trying to play highest level possible, to fight for anything. That's my goal now. Not thinking about it being the last time here. If that's the last time, let's try to enjoy it as much as possible. Let's create something special, no? George, do you think it'll be his last time?
Wasn't it earlier?
Yeah, it was. That's why I did it.
So I think, just quickly on the Roy thing, it'd be interesting to see the impact of that, because he's obviously someone who's been there since like 2005, and we've seen Djokovic and Vida, for example, that really crumbled when he left, and it sounds like Roig's, there's not been a fallout or anything. He just wants to go and kind of test himself to be an actual coach or whatever. But it'd be interesting to see what impact that has on Nadal, if any. I suspect probably not much, but anyway, an interesting footnote potentially. In terms of Nadal saying he won't be back, normally I would laugh that off because I swear he said that exact quote for the last 12 years. But I mean, last year was another really challenging one, wasn't it? From kind of the French Open onwards. He did well to win the French, but then he was talking about having no feeling in his foot. He pulled out of that semi-final clash with Nick Kyrgios at Wimbledon. He wasn't fit at the US Open. He struggled for form beyond that. He became a father. How much is that shifting his priorities? There were a few questions, weren't there, about how's he finding it? And, he's saying, we have a bit of extra help, which is quite an honest thing for a tennis player to say. Normally they like to make it out like it's great martyrdom, when we all know in reality it's they're in better places than most for kind of child support. Sorry, that was a bit of a mean comment, wasn't it? I should be a bit nicer as a tennis parent.
No, I think it's perfectly reasonable.
I think it's interesting. We've said year after year after year, this guy can't keep going. He's had so many physical problems. It's all going to come down crashing. But the older he gets, the more that conversation just has to happen, doesn't it?
This foot thing is serious. He won't be back. This foot thing
serious.
Is really serious. Like, I really do think it is really quite bad. And also, the procedure that he had is generally estimated to last sort of 6 months to a year. So at some point, it's going to wear off, and he's either going to have to go, okay, we'll do this again, and there's no guarantee it works the same way, or he'll have to do something different. I don't know. Calvin, I have a two-pronged question for you, Calvin. What's your sense of Nadal's long-term, short-term, medium-term, long-term future? But also, and maybe first, Francisco Roig. I mean, it's rare for any coach to spend 17 years, on tour with a player. But I mean, maybe it won't make a difference, but it must make some difference when it's a big person to lose in your life.
It's a weird one with Nadal, though. He has a lot of these coaching changes, just always with these random ex-Spanish players who sort of come and work with him for a bit, and I do wonder how much they do.
But Roig has been the constant throughout that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, sometimes it might have been his choice. Sometimes, you want a challenge. You want a new challenge sometimes. And, again, he's so good as Nadal. Professionally, you sort of might think at that stage, am I getting enough challenge out of this? I'd like to go and work with a player and develop them and see if I can change the course of their career rather than churn out. It's one of those with Nadal, probably turning up at the tournaments thinking he's either fit, and if he's fit, he's going to be in the final, and it's going to be a close one with whoever he plays. And if he's not fit, it's another nightmare because we don't know how long he's got left.
Yeah.
So, it'd be strange.
How long do you think he's got left?
I genuinely think it's hard to tell. I think it's a weird one. I think when we say this, they ask the players, they ask Murray about all the time. How long is it the last time you'll play? It was the last time. Is it the last time he's going to play with Jamie last week? And it's like they don't know. I'm sure they hope it's not. It's not. But once you get to that age, you start thinking, maybe it is. Maybe. It might not even be injury. It's like maybe the form just goes, the legs just go, and they fancy, I can't do this another year or something. Nadal's not going to be hanging around at 30 in the world, losing last 16s regularly. Once he figures he can't win the slams anymore, he won't be there.
I'm also surprised, and there are lots of other things that go into starting a family, but he always kind of said that he wouldn't do it while he was still on tour. And now he is still on tour and he has started a family. And
I think that's another thing, though, that you don't know. You just don't know. It's like, those things are not always planned.
No,
exactly. And he might not be ready to do it. He might not be, I think with Murray, Murray at the injury probably thought, this is probably it. And then, he had some time at home not doing anything and thought, I'm just going to do this however long I can now. And same with Federer. What do you do? I remember Federer always said that somebody asked Federer once in an interview when was he going to retire? And he said, well, when you retire, you tend to do the things that you love doing most. And the thing he loves doing most is playing tennis. So why would he retire? And the only thing that's ended Federer's career was the injury.
Yeah, I think on the kind of family starting thing from Nadal, in fairness, I mean, there weren't too many people mucking around near the top of the game at 36. He probably could have had a good look 10 years ago and think, oh, yeah, I'll definitely retire before I have a family. But actually, now he's at a fairly... Well, not an old age to become a father, but not certainly one of the older ones on the tour, I would say, of those who have become a father for the first time. So, but yeah, it'll be really interesting. I hope he gets at least one more good French Open where he at least has a competitive match with someone fun. That would be my hope for him. But I get increasingly less sure he will win another one, which means he's definitely going to win the French Open again.
Indeed. If he doesn't win the French Open, then this bloke might. Novak Djokovic has made a change in his coaching team, or I would suggest maybe an even more minor one. He's got rid of the man they call Magic Hands, Ulises Badio, Uli, and replaced him with Claudio Zimaglia, who has worked at the Piatti Centre for a long time. He's worked with Sinner, Raonic, Coric, Maria Sharapova as well. So he's very experienced. Djokovic says he's also got Milan Amanovic in Australia with him, who was his physio for a long time before he left in 2017 with the big Vida clear out. So that's a very familiar face, which is quite interesting. I don't know how much to say about that. We don't know how much is going on with Djokovic at the moment. He will play in Adelaide next week, so maybe we'll talk about Djokovic, the tennis player, at length that then, and we'll know how he'll be received in Australia by then as well. And then on to the third of the big three, Roger Federer, whose former coach Ivan Lubicic has been signed up by the FFT, very interestingly, to help guide their players, young players specifically, on the pathway and kind of work their way through it. Calvin, I wanted to ask you about this because it's quite an interesting move for someone to go from, albeit Federer's not necessarily been on tour the last year or two, but to go from that job to then working with lots of different and young players, that's quite a sort of change of pace, isn't it?
Yeah, although Lubicic is not really like other coaches either. I think he's done quite well for himself financially through various other things. And, he's quite an intelligent bloke and likes to do different things. I don't think he's not someone who needs to necessarily be on with a player. And, he's got his agency and that kind of thing. I think it's more. He was always more likely to take a different route than some guys who are just, they're the foot soldiers and this is what we do.
Am I right in thinking Ljubicic is one of those rare coaches you actually rate, Calvin, or have I completely concocted that?
He did a great job with Federer. Federer looked done and dusted, didn't he? And so yeah, he's one of the.
Was he part of the racket change as well? The bit, the famous like.
I imagine he was part of the conversation. I don't think you'd just do that, without consulting the coach. So maybe it was his suggestion. I don't know, but yeah, very good coach. It would surprise me if somebody doesn't, if one of the next generation, the next gen, as tennis people like to call them, doesn't come and take him, snap him up. Now he's available.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think that job isn't full time, and he could maybe do. You could get him in for 7 or 8 tournaments a year or something like that.
And a lot of those guys, who are in the top 10, they kind of need a push to go and take the next big step, and you think they probably need to, go and get whoever's the best around. And I would say, in terms of proven, as I said earlier, causation isn't the same as correlation. It's not just because somebody wins that they've got a great coach with them. But Ljubicic was one who improved Federer, and there's not many people could say that.
No.
So I would think, it'd be a great match for someone like Felix, Chapeau, maybe, although I think that's probably a lost cause.
How about Tsitsipas?
Tsitsipas could be a good one, although you'd have, he made Federer's backhand better, but he's a good coach.
Not a miracle worker.
Not a miracle worker, yeah.
You mentioned Denis Shapovalov there, a lost cause. I'm sure vaguely tongue in cheek, but part of that is because Jamie Delgado did work with him very briefly, and that split happened very quickly. Jamie Delgado is now working with Grigor Dimitrov and has been for the last couple of weeks. And it was very interesting to hear them chatting at the United Cup and what he was saying. Calvin, the bloke they call Delgs, or I've seen some people called Delgs, which might be the worst abbreviation of a surname I've ever heard. Delgs quite well. What sort of coach is he?
It's funny you say that, because this morning I don't know whether you heard it on BT, they were asking Laura Robson about the nicknames, in inverted commas, of the British team. They seemed to think it was a really great conversation. She was like, I'm called, they know me as Robbo, and Katie is Swanee, and it's Noz, and Tim is even called Henners. And then she goes, the list is endless. Not sure we really grasp what endless means here.
Or
with
nickname.
This one. Yeah. I don't know Dels that well. I know him, spoke to him. I'll chat with him when I see him. Did an excellent job with Gilles Muller. Was very well regarded on the tour for what he did there. And then Andy went and got him and took him on board. It's a weird one with Andy, wasn't it? Because he never seemed to fully fancy having him as the main coach.
Yeah.
Always wanted Lendl there, who, a lot of people have questioned how much Lendl actually does.
Well, he sends a lot of emails, I think, from the golf course.
Yeah. And then, that sort of relationship ended. So we kind of don't know where Jamie is in terms of, how good a coach he is. Well, the Shapovalov one again, I won't read anything into that, because imagine that was, a tough gig.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he goes with Dimitrov. It's like you wonder whether there's another kick on for Dimitrov.
I have to say he looked really good against Tsitsipas. Like he struck the ball really well, and like all the bits are still there, but all the same little pitfalls are still there as well. Still a little bit hesitant in big moments. Still got that horrible second serve bottle job.
I also won't have it, and I know people have messaged me on Twitter going like, "Oh, he statistically hits the biggest ball around," but he's just a bit powder puff. He can hit a good ball, but you just don't see. He always, when people say he was like Federer, he's always kind of like Federer with 10% less power.
Yeah,
and he's a beautiful move. He moves around the court so smoothly, and he's a really good volleyer, one of the few good volleyers around, and he always seems like a good bloke as well. you know, and famously provided us with one of our favourite lines of commentary, didn't he? Through Macmillan.
He enjoys a female companion was the Through Macmillan line, which is just wrong on so many levels. George, you had something reasonable to say.
I was just going to say, I think, you know, the biggest challenge with Dimitrov would be turning that head into someone who thinks he actually can win a slam or something. You know, I think for Jamie to have success with Dimitrov, that really looks like taking him to a slam final, which he's not done.
Yeah,
you know, that's the kind of, he's won the ATP finals, he's been to Grand Slam semi-finals, he's won Masters events, I'm sure. Actually, has he? He must have won. That is a good question, actually. I've kind of snookered myself there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, why have you done this, George? I don't want to be Googling Grigor Dimitrov career statistics at this time.
So if you ask, but anyway, look, the thing where it counts is, can he do it at a Grand Slam, go deep? I do think there'll be this period of wilderness where random people do suddenly have their chance.
He won Cincinnati in 2017.
Cincinnati. So he's won one Masters, one ATP Finals, which means he's got one Slam left to win, and he's won everything at every level. So that's the measure of success.
He'll have completed tennis. All right, we have one more coaching change to talk about, and it's probably the one that lots of other people talked about much more than we have. And it's Emma Raducanu, who is now working with Sebastian Sachs, who's a young German chap. He used to work with Belinda Bencic, so there's clearly a kind of personality type emerging there. From people I've spoken to, he's a very meticulous guy, a very professional guy, quite high level of intensity, which I think is what they're looking for in the Raducanu camp, albeit they're looking very hard, obviously, because they have been through it. He's not a permanent appointment, as very few of them are at the moment, but there's an expectation that he'll be there until the end of the Australian Open, and then we'll see from there. He's also worked, I think he used to travel with Victoria Azarenka as her hitting partner, Calvin, and I'm right in saying you've been on the same court as Victoria Azarenka, albeit maybe not on court with Victoria Azarenka, if that makes sense.
Luke, who I coach, he hit with her at Wimbledon 2021.
She's very intense in practice, is that right?
Very, very, very intense, but actually quite nice, really nice in the conversations we had with her. But yeah, very intense, and let's say she doesn't like the person who's on the practice court before her going a second over, or she just doesn't allow it. She'll just walk on midpoint. If the minute that clock crosses the hour, she will just walk on the court.
Brilliant.
But yeah, so
I mean, what that makes me think is anyone who's traveled. I mean, because he travelled with her for quite a few years, I think, probably shares a similar attitude, and that maybe tells us about something about what the Raducanu camp want from a coach.
I mean, I don't know. You know, I'm just very, very skeptical about this. I'm very skeptical about WTA coaches who used to be hitting partners anyway, and then I'm extremely skeptical about the Raducanu setup when employing a coach, mainly because they've stated two things before: that they don't think any tennis coaches are any good, and they all they want to do is take the information and then get rid of them. And that's not my opinion. They've said that. You know, so I'm very skeptical as to, you know, how this works out. I don't know if he's any good or if he's not. But I know the pathway, the WTA coaching pathway is normally former male player, hitting partner, coach, and then then just goes around different players as coach, stroke hitting partner.
James, I'd also like to potentially correct you on something. I would change your statement to he'll last to the end of her Australian Open, because I suspect she'll be out first week and he'll be gone as well. So he might not be the Australian Open, but hers perhaps would be my guess at this stage.
Well, I look forward to seeing a bit more of him and getting to know him a bit more, because it would be. I mean, he's a new face, and the noises that I've heard so far have been good. Possibly in a way that hasn't really been good before. So, positive signs so far, but the proof will be in the pudding. She plays in Auckland to open her season, so we'll see how that goes. And incredibly, I think that is it. I've written down Battle of the Brits recap, but Andy Murray beat Jack Draper, which seems like a vaguely notable result, but it was an exhibition, so Oh, go on, George.
I was gonna say, the funniest thing I thought was, like, I I read a few articles around it and watched bits and bobs, but again, in my rule of not watching exhibitions, I didn't watch much of it because I refused to invest in them at this time of year. There's too much tennis the rest of the year. But the thing that amused me most was that Ian Holloway was being sold as a way of like having broader appeal. Is Ian Holloway like popular in Aberdeen? What on earth is the rationale behind that?
So he was the England captain, right?
Yes.
And Ali McCoist was the Scotland captain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Holloway's got a good agent. I know that. I've not got much more than that, I'm afraid. Look, I love Ollie. Like he's politically incorrect at times, and he doesn't mind saying what he thinks. But he's a very funny man, and I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's very worthwhile. So I won't hear a word against him. And you know, he's a member of the true bald community, so we can't criticise him too much. It's just a grin from Calvin. No real bite. I think that's all we've got time for, albeit time is endless at the moment. Thank you very much for listening, as always. If you made it this far, congratulations. If you can guess what our big change is, well, it's not hard, but why don't you tweet us at LoveTennisPod for the moment anyway. If you want to get in touch and send us an email, you can do. It's lovetennispod@gmail.com. It's LoveTennisPod on Twitter. But most importantly, come back next week and listen again.
Social Podcast Network.